Welcome to Enroute, the podcast of the First Responder Behavioral Health Institute. The First Responder Behavioral Health Institute is bringing together some of the most inspiring and dedicated change agents in the global public safety, psychotherapy, and educational communities. Each episode of Enroute seeks to bring together first responder change agents and clinicians dedicated to constructively disrupting the status quo by tackling the tough subjects like first responder suicide, post-traumatic stress, moral injury, sanctuary trauma, leadership development, critical incident response, peer support teams, and what it means to be psychologically safe and healthy while working in an unsafe world. All units, please stand by. The Enroute podcast is about to begin. You can resume normal traffic on this channel after this transmission. Welcome to this episode of Enroute. I'm Joseph Burgundy. Today we have Mark Bouchard visiting with us. Mark is a current member of the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. He's a member of their ERT Emergency Response Team, which is the Canadian equivalent of a SWAT team. He also holds the special designation and achievement of medic on the team. He's assigned to the Williams Lake Detachment in British Columbia, a suburb of Vancouver. Mark completed a master's degree in leadership from Royal Rhodes University. He's the author of Setting My Sights on Stigma, Thoughts from an Injured Mind, a book which he details his road to recovery and the many challenges he's faced along the path towards recovery and achieving wellness after receiving a PTSD diagnosis in 2015. He's a peer support member and a Road to Mental Readiness instructor for his agency. Mark offers a two-part course titled Police Culture and Lethal Force Decisions on our platform, the First Responder Behavioral Health Institute. It's my pleasure to welcome Mark Bouchard to Enroute.
Thanks a lot, Joseph. I'm real excited to be here.
And we're very happy to have you. For our viewers that don't know about your background and your history, why don't you go ahead and fill us in about your time in public safety and a little bit more about you.
Sure, I'd love to. I started in policing as a reserve, so a volunteer. Some would call it an auxiliary, where you're unarmed, but you're out in uniform helping. Did that for about a year or two, about 2005. I was hired in 2007 with the Delta Police Department, same organization I volunteered with. I had a knee injury, spent about a year helping in the forensic section while I was waiting to go to training. And then hit the road kind of late 2008, early 2009. Did about 5 years on patrol. Transferred over to the Emergency Response Team, which up here in Canada, that's what a lot of people would know of as SWAT. So full-time tactical policing in a pretty busy, basically Vancouver area. Did that for almost 6 years. In my first year there, I became a tactical medic. So we call it an EMERT up here, but it's essentially an advanced care scope of practice. Did that for about five years, which was great. And then developed a real passion for mental health. Having experienced some myself and some real hardships, I had a couple months off on stress leave that I really didn't want to take, but I just was not functioning well and life was really hitting me in the face. And just saw how important it was and started talking to people about it and just saw how much it was needed. So I've really tried to learn and share from that. After my time on ERT, I went back to the Delta Patrol section for about 6 months. Did a lot of field training, even before, did a bunch of field training. And then I transferred to the RCMP. So for anyone down in the US, that's basically Canada's national police force. Fills a lot of mandates, so it feels like a local, a provincial, and a federal. So it's all encompassing. It's a very large organization. I think we're close to 20,000 cops. And transferred to a more rural area, like a small town policing. About 10,000 town I live in a place called Williams Lake. And I'm on general duty, which is what we call patrol. So I have a patrol response as a constable, just a regular frontline cop. And And then I have a part-time position on our ERT team and as a medic and in some different peer support programs that we have. We have several different programs, and I'm part of like our peer-to-peer. We have a proactive team that reaches out after critical incidents that I do as well. And just gives me a chance to try and help in several different ways.
You know, Mark, one of the things that I noticed in your book was that you spoke about the culture. You spoke about the bravado. The machismo is strong in the fire service as well as in law enforcement. We all think that we can't show vulnerability, that we can't share our emotions with our fellow members and often with our family. Talk to me a little bit about the culture behind some of that.
Yeah, culture is huge. Culture informs what we do. You know, culture eats policy. We can write a policy, but it doesn't matter if people won't do it. And to bring it back to mental health, like we have lots of different mental health support programs in my organization. And when I did my research for my master's degree, I interviewed frontline police officers, and some of them described a lot of symptoms of what I would say is traumatic stress. Not that I can diagnose it, but symptoms consistent with that diagnosis, and yet had never once accessed help. And on the other side of that, they're telling me they want to be ordered to go. So they actually do want help in a way. They do recognize they would benefit from this and like it. They can already go for free and no one needs to know, but yet they're not going. And yet they're asking to be ordered to go. I can't think of anything else where cops want to be ordered to do something. Like cops don't want to be told to do anything, but they're asking to be ordered to go. What they're really asking for is for us to create a culture where they feel safe and where they can go and where they won't feel stigmatized. You know, to use the direct language, they're asking for us to destigmatize mental health. And that's why I started speaking about it. I expected to get shame when I shared those stories of, having nightmares or having a panic attack or crying or all these things. And what I actually got was connection, because that vulnerability, that being real with people, it actually takes courage and often connects with people on the experiences you went through. Now, culture is really hard to change, but culture is when the senior people teach the newer people how to manage the internal and external problems in a way that's worked well enough. And the history for both law enforcement and I think many of the other first responder professions has been things like drinking. Just numb it with alcohol. And when I was a new cop, sometimes it'd be hey, we're all going to go have drinks after shift at 6 a.m. It's one way of dealing with things. I would argue it's going to make it worse, and it's not a good strategy, but that was the culture. And I'd say that's changed a lot. I don't really see nearly as much of that or even any of that sometimes happening anymore in where I am. So I think there's really positive progress. It's still a long transition. So, you know, those of us who are out speaking about these topics and are trying to make change with what you're doing with the Institute, that's huge. And you're bringing together numerous people who are doing this, who are changing culture. We're changing it within our sphere of influence. And I mean, culture change often takes years to happen as you slowly influence some people and then they continue to influence the next generation. But you just pass on a new mental model that normalizes a lot of what we go through, because it is normal. It is okay. I say this, you're a person first and a cop second. And you're really not a cop second. You're lots of other, I'm a dad, I'm all these other things. But it's accepting my humanity and realizing it's a good thing I'm a human. And if I go to something terribly tragic and it makes me cry, that's okay. I'm a person. That's not a bad thing. And if I get to the point that I never feel anything, like, what does that really mean? Should I celebrate that? Or is that something I should be concerned about? And how does that impact our family and our loved ones? If you go to work and you're the cop who never cries about the horrible things you might see, but you're the parent who comes home and tells your kid you can't tell your kid you love them, I don't think that's a good trade-off. And I think that we can pass on these better ways. And it's growing. It just takes a long time, and we're going to get there.
You know, I couldn't agree more. One of the things that I enjoyed in one of our offline conversations, as you had mentioned, I'm not here for a revolution. I'm here for evolution. Culture does change slowly. We have to educate our leaders and help them to go ahead and embrace new ways of doing things. That takes time. It takes an education, and you're putting yourself out there. Your book is Making Yourself Vulnerable. It's a great read. In some areas, it's a hard read. but it's an essential read to go ahead and help you to reflect on your own journey and your own struggles, accepting the challenges of what we do. Being a first responder has its own complexities. It's the very definition of complex trauma over a lifetime. But yet, in our education and training models, I know it is true for the paramedic program and the EMT programs. 15 pages, maybe, in the entire curriculum and that discuss anything to do with behavioral health. And most of that is about physical or chemical restraint of the patient. Nothing to go ahead and help you understand human behavior. And nothing at all directed towards understanding yourself. And I'm assuming that the police academy is not much different.
Yeah, that's a great question. It is something that is starting to make some progress. I know personally, I've gone out to, we have a national training center called Depot in Regina. I went out there last month to do a talk on mental health to recruits and to the current employees. I did one in May, and it was a program that started in February with another officer who's done a great job getting it started and keeping it going. And really that is just normalizing mental health. Right? That's what the literature calls for. And that's what we haven't been doing. So as an example, say something like fatal collisions. We have courses on how to process the scene and do the math and add up the tire marks and how to measure them. Do we have something for how to deal with some of the emotional pain that comes with that? Do we teach people about empathy, that it's a natural part of being human? And that when we see others suffering and we see sadness, that we can take a piece of that and that we can normalize dealing with it. Because I carried pain from a terrible crash and a terrible notification of family members for 10 years. But then I actually found a way to let it go. And I heard that from this a psychologist, Dr. Jody Carrington, at one point. And she basically said, hey, you don't have to carry this around. You can come in my office and you can talk about it, and there's proven treatments, and you can help put it down over here, and it can just sit in the corner. You don't need to carry it around for the rest of your life. And I don't have to pick it up. It can just sit there. And I just had this moment of wow, we need to start teaching that more. And because I wasn't able to force that into police training curriculum, that's where I decided I may not be able to change within the system, but I can write about it and teach about it and share what I learned that helped me do it for myself, role model it, and then provide that for other people. And that's what I've tried to do, where I share the story in a way that doesn't spread vicarious trauma. So I don't share the gory details, but I share my feelings and I give an overview of what happens. And then I dive into the science of what psychologists and authors and books and researchers have said, because there is so much good science out there. And for an example, for me, I was diagnosed with PTSD many years ago, and I was told by a psychologist that I should try EMDR. And I said to him, you can't make me try your voodoo bullshit, which is stupid. You have a great treatment that's proven super effective that we should know about, that should be normalized. But instead, I'm carrying this self-stigma of I'm not going to be crazy and I'm not going to do your crazy stuff. Even though it works, I wouldn't even listen. And I've still to this day never tried it. And what I want to do is change that mental model for future people. Because I've had friends phone me and say, hey, my psychologist suggested I should try this. What do you think? And I'll just ask them, do you want to try something that has proven to help a lot of people? Because it makes sense to me to give it a try. And maybe that's not the right thing for you. Maybe it's a different treatment method. That's okay. Try one. And if it doesn't work, try the next. If you try one counselor, therapist, and you didn't like them, try the next. And I get it. I was on stress leave and I went to an appointment with my psychologist. He just forgot about me. He didn't show up. That broke my heart. I spent all week excited to get better and go and see him because he's the person that's going to help me. And he let me down. And eventually I had to switch to a different psychologist because that trust was so severely broken. But I also didn't have a great relationship beforehand, which now I recommend to people to do that as well. So to wind back to your question, Joseph, yes, I think we have started to include mental health in training and to, again, change the culture towards that. But I think there's a whole lot more we can do. And what I would love to see is instead of 4 hours of a course, say R2MAR, let's make it 40. And let's look at how much better our results are. Because when you look at really hard topics, like something like first responder suicides, the answer isn't have the best crisis line to catch someone at the last minute The answer is prevention and education 10 years earlier, so they never get to that point where we need the crisis line. And I'm not saying to do away with intervention. We do need intervention. I'm not at all saying to get away with it. But I am saying let's focus more on long-term strategies that can really help people over the long term.
One of the things that you mentioned was EMDR. And if I had $10 for every time I've heard it called a voodoo experience, I'd be retired already. As a matter of fact, one of the courses we're offering on the Institute is a 3-hour introduction to try to demystify it. And I titled it EMDR, the Voodoo Cure to Trauma, because of the fact that in so many debriefings I've heard it described that way. People aren't getting underneath it and understanding it. Being certified in EMDR as an EMDR clinician, and having worked with people at advanced levels of trauma and disassociation, I'm here to tell you it's a highly effective treatment, and it doesn't work for everyone, and I'm glad you said that. That's why we have different modalities, and you have to go through a process with a clinician you can trust. You also brought up the break of trust, and I'm glad you did, and I'm sorry it happened to you. But one of the things that's important is that you acknowledge that the relationship doesn't always work, and you don't stop there. What I'll go ahead and often say is, when would you stop teaching a child to walk? And the obvious answer is when they're walking. You try again and again a different way, a different technique. You try a different practitioner if you need to. Many of my clients have been to 3 or 6 therapists before they land on my doorstep. And then they stay a couple of years, and then they go deep, and they get the work done that they need to do to process the trauma on the job. And oftentimes there's early adverse childhood experiences or other personal things that have had entered into this that they need to go ahead and work through. And then they get on a path to wellness, and they get on a path to making a difference. But I think if your trust has been broken, or if you didn't establish the rapport within the time you're spending with that clinician, first, please give it 3 to 6 visits. Make sure that you're giving that clinician a try. But if you're not feeling it after that, go find another one. And how do you pick a clinician? I want to hear that this clinician has spent time studying complex trauma, taken additional courses beyond grad school in understanding complex trauma, traumatic-related disassociation, and that they have some experience with first responders. Now, they do not have to be like me, a veteran first responder themselves, but they have to be in tune to our culture. So what did you do to get there? And I want to hear that they are helping out with debriefings, helping out with peer support teams, have taken extra courses and volunteer so that they've stood in our shoes a little bit. And they're ready to go ahead and, do the work necessary to work with a veteran, to work with a first responder. Not every clinician has this skill set, and that's something that gets overlooked as well. So you discussed trust. That was important. EMDR, absolutely. You've talked about administration. And one of the other things that comes up a lot, when I have a first responder in the treatment suite and where my index of suspicion of suicidality starts rising, it's because of 3 things. The psychology of the individual. They're not leading a healthy lifestyle. There's some psychology that went on with a call most often. Some traumatic call brought them here. But then one of the other things that I know that now we're really starting to become concerned is the psychology of the workforce, organizational development. They're starting to experience moral injury and sanctuary trauma. And people don't understand what that is really. And what it really is talking about is, I went to my own people for help. And not only did I not get help, I got stigmatized. I got reassigned. I got moved to a different shift. They're trying to make me go away. And that really is something that we need to change our culture and educate, but it is another area of psychology, and that area of psychology is organizational development and leadership development. Can you talk a little bit about that? And by the way, I did not mention that you also just recently completed a master's in leadership from Royal Rhodes University. So I was not surprised at all when I found out your journey took you there as well. So how does all of that work? Sanctuary trauma, leadership, and cultural change. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, thanks, Joseph. Well, you brought up two things there. You obviously referenced suicide a bit as well, and then you talked about organizational challenges. To me, those are two of the topics that I found crucially important and that I knew very little about, and I made each a chapter in my book because I had a chance to live some of those different aspects, and then really learn about them. So on the organizational side, yeah, it's huge. Like how many people in a police context, say you go through a shooting and the event's terrible, but then the experience after is terrible, where you feel like you're treated like a criminal. Like I have friends who've said that about their shooting. It's what we do. It's what we do with their gun and their uniform and how we treat them. And we make them sit in a room for 10 hours by themselves because no one can talk to them when they've done nothing wrong. Like they heroically tried to keep their community safe. They nearly died. They did everything they could. And then they're made to feel like they did something wrong. And that's how it's in the moment sometimes. But there's ones afterwards. The ones I've talked to people where they ask for help and someone gives them the piece of paper with a bunch of names of psychologists or counselors and phone numbers, and they call every name on the list and they all say, I'm not taking patients. Well, we just failed that person. And now it just makes it so much worse where you finally get over the hurdle. I mean, for me, my example is like, it took me a lot to get in the door of a psychologist. Like that sounds like not that big a deal. It was a huge deal for me. And you finally get there, and then now you're kind of feeling screwed on the other end. So that, sanctuary trauma, like that's the thing we can control. We can't control some of the operational challenges. There's going to be death, there's going to be hardship, there's going to be suffering, and our job is to go and deal with that. And those can be hard on us. We cannot minimize all of that. That's a reality of our job. We can minimize much of the sanctuary trauma, organizational stress, and we can create the healthy environment, the supportive environment where people feel enabled to do their job and supported to do it well. And that is slowly changing. I have seen it change in my organization. I mentioned being a part of a couple different teams, the peer-to-peer team and the proactive support response team, which is really a proactive outreach after critical incidents. And just hearing from someone, hey, I care about you. How are you doing? And doing a little bit of stigma reduction. It's okay if this bugs you. It's okay if it doesn't too. That's fine too. And here's a bit of psychoeducation. Here's a little bit of like understanding nightmares and understanding sleep and understanding alcohol. Here's some things you can do to change your outcomes. And actually to tie it back into my book, that's what I try and do is give people tools. But the number one tool that I wrote about, it's the first tool I mentioned in my chapter that's all about trauma, is take action. That's what I call it. Do something. Because for me, I felt like a victim to my PTSD diagnosis when I changed my mindset to a psychological injury and realized I had some control. When I quit drinking, my life started getting better. And that's what we find with studies, that people, just by taking part in a study, there's like a placebo effect. You just get a sugar pill and all of a sudden you start feeling better. Nothing's really changed other than you feel you did something. You feel you have some control. And if our organizations have the leaders who set up systems in place to make that better for us, that will be a really big thing. But I also want to touch on one other thing you said, which is suicide. Because I feel like for a long time, it's the thing that like wasn't safe to talk about, right? And as a new cop, I would hear about suicides in the first responder community. And my first reaction was like, how did we hire this person? I don't get it. I went through a psych exam. Like, I don't know how we hired someone who's suicidal. But I think we've failed to look at the system and how challenging it can be for our mental health and what things we can do proactively to get ahead of it, to make it okay to seek help, to change things around our sleep, to change things around our culture, to avoid the isolation. Like isolation is such a risk factor that, making sure that someone is getting help and feeling supported and changing all those factors will promote that long-term health. And I think those are there's a connection there within the changing culture and creating a supportive environment that where officers and where first responders can really thrive would be great for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things you talked about too is physical fitness a little bit in your book. The fact that when we're starting to suffer and struggle, we tend to pull away from that workout, pull away from the running, pull away from activities like that and, stay out a little bit, have a little too much to drink. The signs and symptoms that things are getting worse. What were some of the struggles that you've seen other officers discuss when their mental health is starting to decline, and how do you turn them around?
To me, probably the biggest thing to start with is sleep.
Yeah.
And I'll talk to officers who show up, they didn't sleep at all night. Mm-hmm. And then they show up to work. You can't function. You are legally drunk. And now you might go into life and death situations, and you're going to be held responsible for those decisions, and people's lives will be impacted. And for many, it's not you didn't sleep all night. It's that you got 3 hours sleep and you woke up from 2 terrible nightmares and you're a wreck, right? And I've had times when you're hoping to go to work the next day and you have nights like that and you can't function. And it's not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong, but it is a sign and symptom of declining mental health. And hopefully it's a prompt to take proactive action to make it better. So sleep would definitely be one of them. Even our diet, our, like you said, exercise. When I was on stress leave, I had physical injuries as well. And I received some different treatments for my back, which meant I essentially was unable to work out or really be very active for about a week at a time each time. And those are 2 of my hardest weeks, because when we're active, it's good for us. We feel good. We're burning off that stress. If you can wake up and get sunlight and get active, you get, endorphins, you just feel good, and it burns off some of the negative energy and the stress. Whereas when we lose that, that's really hard. And, as the stress builds up, and I get it, when you're too busy, you don't have time. You don't make time for your health. But I feel like it catches up to us in the long run. You try and get by in the short term by sacrificing, your workouts, your sleep, all these things. And I get it. We're all busy. I got 2 young kids. I'm a shift worker. I essentially have, in a way, a couple jobs with call outs and overtime for the other positions. So it's not easy to manage it. But for me, the one thing that really helped me was setting different boundaries, where we always want to say yes. There's always a new emergency. And that was part of what led me to burnout and stress leave. Was I would say yes to every call out. It was always an emergency. There was always a shooting and a guy with a gun and a new high risk warrant. And the guys say, we didn't have enough guys. And you feel bad. But at some point, without those boundaries, you can't take care of yourself for the long term. And then you're not able to help anyone. And I went from having to respond to every emergency to not being able to respond for several months. And I mean, personally, I failed my first psych exam for my return to work. I legitimately was not in a place that I should be working at all. And that was a part of what got me there. So by, again, changing the culture to normalize long-term care, taking care of ourselves. And sometimes I say no. I'd rather work one guy short at work than take a bunch of call-outs on my day off, because eventually that's going to catch up to you, and not just you, but it's going to catch up to your family. At some point when you're always running out the door, show me where you spend your time and I'll tell you what your priority is. And your kids, your spouse, they need to be the priority too. If the priority is always the next big call and you always got to run out the door, I think you're going to pay for it in the long run, and you're probably going to regret it.
Yeah, I think you're right. And one of the things I really appreciated that you said was about our sleep, and how sleep deprivation actually mimics being drunk. You don't sleep a couple, 3 nights, and you might as well be intoxicated. And your responses, if we were to give you a DWI exam, are going to be the same. You're going to have the same, deficits and deficiencies. And it's also one of the reasons that critical incident stress debriefings were done on the 3rd day. I'd asked Jeffrey Mitchell about that in his original design, and he said if they haven't gotten back to sleep in 2 nights, this is actually a diagnostic indicator of what's going on here, and they should be returning back to sleep. So it's important to recognize we need to get enough sleep. You mentioned exercise. It's important that we're doing that. I'm just going to ask you what it is you do for exercise. I'm just assuming, being a Canadian, you play hockey.
Yeah, I do, actually. We have a senior A men's team up here in town, which is pretty awesome. It's basically playing junior hockey. There's hitting and fighting, and people, fans pay money to come to the games and travel to watch us. And it's probably gonna be my last year. I'm 40, so I'll probably move into a rec league next year, because I play a fairly physical style. But yeah, that's one part. I love working out. Any day I get to work out is awesome. If I wake up and go for workout first thing in the morning, and you change up what you do, try and it's better if you don't do the same thing all the time. But I love anything where I get in the gym, get to throw some weights around. And I feel great when I get the chance to do that for sure.
Yeah. But you didn't say you were going to stop playing hockey.
I'll probably never really fully stop. I think if anything, I'm going to transition to coaching. My oldest is 4 and he'll be playing soon. And I've done a bunch of coaching. I coached about 6 years of minor hockey before I got into policing. So I think I'll transition to coaching him, and that'll fill a bit of the void of what hockey was for me. And I'll get to, just love being a dad and watching the kids grow up and play. And I think that'll be even more meaningful than playing myself anymore.
Nice. I didn't realize what a cultural imperative hockey was till I went up there. And then I got my change and I flipped over the $5 bill.
Yeah, it's hockey's huge in Canada. We love hockey. Yeah. That's all I wanted to be as a kid was I wanted to be a hockey player. And eventually that kind of transitioned into becoming a cop. And my identity went from I'm a hockey player growing up to I'm a cop. And then eventually it kind of got replaced with I'm a dad, right? And I'm still a cop. That's still a part of my identity. But I think it's really healthy that I'm a dad and a husband and other things first. I think it helps me to be a more well-rounded police officer and first responder than the one who just lives to be a cop but kind of puts their family second.
Speaking of people who influence you to become who you are today, who are some of the influences that you look up to and that helped you to become?
Wow, there's a lot. I mean, I'd start with my dad. My dad's not a cop. He's an accountant. He actually has an accounting company and still works to this day, even though he's 75. Just learned a lot of compassion for people from him and empathy and hard work. My hockey coaches growing up, I was really fortunate to have some great coaches. I played on some very successful teams. So we won essentially provincials, which would be like state 3 different times. And then we went on and kind of won everything, like kind of the national championship. Technically up here it was called the Western Canadian Championship. But so I was very fortunate, played some high level sports like that, and then had a bunch of police mentors. So as much as I'm talking about police culture a little bit on this episode, people taught me the culture. Like you showed up and they taught me more about ethics and integrity and honor and trust. Like do the right thing even when no one's watching, and try and make yourself a little better every day and try and prepare for the hard day and like do good in the community, whatever that means. Like you get to, like, if it's going and finding drunk drivers or it's going to catch people doing property crime, you're getting paid for 12 hours, go find a way to make the community a little bit better. And I've been really lucky to have some awesome mentors in policing in general. And then with ERT specifically too, same thing, like some people who really have been through a lot of hardship and been through some really tough calls and learned lessons the hard way. And very fortunate they passed on those lessons to me. And the last mentors I'd say is so many people from books. Like I'm a big reader and I read a lot of nonfiction, and the people who share their stories, as an example, something like General Romeo Dallaire sharing his experience in Rwanda and his severe battle with PTSD and a psychological injury to really destigmatize it. And actually, you and I were chatting offline a bit about Michael Segru. Same thing with sharing his journey. That's how culture changes, is someone like Michael and Doc Springer have the courage to talk about his story and share the lessons. And there were many lessons I saw in his book that I learned from, and that, again, it's similar type of topics of things like understanding the resistance to lethal force that I wrote a chapter about in my book, because I didn't know it. No one taught me that. But then all of a sudden you just live it. Like you almost shoot someone. I've had numerous times of people pulling guns and having guns in their mouths and just crazy things that you can't make up, where you're so close to shooting someone and you don't. And you don't understand this because no one taught us, right? And you had to learn it the hard way. And instead you just relive it in your nightmares night after night until your subconscious manages to process it enough that you can put it to rest. Well, what if we actually taught people ahead of time? What if we taught them more about that so that they didn't have a 10-year journey? They had a much shorter journey and a lot less pain along the way. So I look up to the people who've had the courage ahead of me, who've made it easier for me. And even in my own life, people who, when I went off work, reached out and just said, hey man, I had a hard time too. Here's a bit of my journey. I'm here for you. It's just people who say, I care about you. That's really all it is. It's empathy. It's you feel a little less alone when it's 1 a.m. and you're up from a nightmare and you can't sleep and you feel terrible. And you just think, oh, I'm not that alone. I could call this person right now. And you never do. Because I've said it to lots of people. Oh, you can call me at 1 a.m. I'll put you in my favorites. It'll wake me up. They never call. Never have yet anyways, but they can. And they know that they're that little bit less alone. That's a part of how we can change the culture to help each other.
I couldn't agree more. And I'm glad you brought up Michael Sugrue. We had the privilege of having him on Enroute a couple of episodes ago. And, his work is life-changing and ongoing. And he continues to deliver messages of smashing the stigma and helping people to understand. One of the things that has also been a fascination of yours is not only police culture, but lethal force decisions. As a matter of fact, you have a course you're offering on the platform, the First Responder Behavioral Health Institute platform, titled Police Culture and Lethal Force Decisions. Tell me a little bit about that course and why you wanted to go ahead and address that issue head on.
Well, it's so needed. Like I said this to you, Joseph, just in our own conversations. Like I teach this for free because I needed this. And I say that not as a SWAT cop, but as a patrol cop. I had someone point to what would turn out to be an imitation firearm at me, and my brain screamed, shoot and move in the exact same instant. And I moved. I didn't shoot. We had information it wasn't a real gun, and you don't know, and then you're in a terrible spot. Our tactics were terrible that day. A lot went wrong. And that was a part of what drove me to go in towards the challenge and to learn about it and to get into the ERT work that I got into. But I didn't understand how powerful our resistance to lethal force is, nor how often we end up in these spots. And since then, man, anecdotally, I've talked to so many officers who were half a trigger pull away from having an officer-involved shooting, as someone's coming at them with a knife and then they last second drop it, and it really impacts them. And I've pulled guys aside and like, hey man, I've been through something kind of like that. That sounds really hard. How you doing? And they'll break down crying. And it's not what we expect. It's not even then they've been in a shooting. It's just how close they were to being in a shooting, because we don't want to shoot people. Like the public needs to hear this. Cops don't want to kill. We do not want to shoot people. It is like Lieutenant Colonel Grossman writes about this, right? In his books on killing, on combat, that this isn't even just a human aversion. This is common in the animal kingdom. Piranhas and rattlesnakes and different animals that are very vicious don't kill their own kind. They purposely do not kill their own kind. And that most of us, the vast majority of humans, probably like 98%, also have that aversion. And when we are put into those situations, they can be so impactful for us. And having talked to other friends who've anything from having shot someone who survived to even people who've stopped an active shooter, who feel a level of pain for having had to shoot someone, for having hurt someone, for having killed someone, because like we sign up to help people, and it's hard to wrap our heads around. Helping people can mean stopping the threat, right? But stopping the threat, that's hard, and that takes training. And what Lieutenant Colonel Grossman would call that is operant conditioning from Skinner's work of you need to train so much that, as one of my friends said to me after a shooting, it felt like a training day, right? So to me, we should be teaching the psychology of lethal force prior to sending officers out to do police work. And that's why one of my chapters is about lethal force psychology, and it's telling one of those stories I've referenced a little bit, and then sharing all these lessons that I learned the hard way. Because I hadn't read On Killing or On Combat or Shots Fired or even Michael's book or any of these other books beforehand. I read them after. I read them as I was processing nightmares and understanding. And when you keep having the shooting dreams and then reading a book like Shots Fired, where, a bunch of cops have had this. And now I talk about it. I talk about it at work. And guess what? Other officers will talk about it, even ones that haven't been through shootings. So it's so desperately needed. And what I tried to do is combine a little bit of science and research and academic journals, even something like suicide by cop. It's so common. It's like, a third of officer-involved shootings, suicide by cop, but they don't teach us about this. And really, that's where us as the officers with some experience who have lived it and now understand it better, it's on us to help pass this on to the next generation. And that's what I want to do. I want to be able to speak about it and share the lessons of people like, what's his name? Sorry, it's evading me right now. He's a professor at SFU. Anyways, so there's some great researchers out there. I write a bit about, Rick Perron. There you go. Just came to me now. Dr. Perron, who did both his master's and his PhD on this topic of officer-involved shootings and suicide by cop. And he found there was about 1/3 of them. There's another study. They're both about 700 participants, his study and the other one. And it also found anywhere from about 36 to the low 40%, depending if you count the subjects who die by their own suicide or suicide by cop. But we don't hear about it. And when we hear in the media of all these police shootings, we always hear of the context of like cop did a bad job. He failed to de-escalate. And it's like, no, man, this person just killed 3 people. And this officer raced in, risked their own life, potentially nearly died. And then they get criticized for the next 3 years and investigated and told how terrible they are. And there's protests and there's signs and all these things. And for me, that's something I want to change. So thankfully, you have helped me with creating this course, and I'm very excited to share it with more people and just share the lessons that I learned for me personally, and then the research that I learned in both doing my master's and just what helped me to prepare for these things. Because when I ran into my 3rd suicide by cop attempt, when someone came out of a house with a gun in their mouth, and I came really close to having to shoot that person as well, it didn't impact me like the first 2 did. The first 2 rocked my world. And the 3rd one, I was more ready to process it. And that my recovery was so much faster.
Understood. And I think that course is going to add a lot of value. Is that one strictly for law enforcement, or can anyone sign up, or do you have to be a first responder? What do you got to do to get into that course?
Yeah, honestly, I'm okay with anybody. I know in talking with you, you've said you're going to keep things to people that are first responders. I'm okay with opening up to everyone, because to me, it's not just a police issue. Like, the police are the public and the public are the police. That's one of the basic fundamentals of policing, going back to Peel's principles. And we need a public that supports us, but that takes a public that understands what we're doing. And if every time the public sees a police use of force incident, and especially a lethal force incident, they think that cop did a bad job, or they use these buzzwords like accountability, that's terrible for policing. And I say that one of my best friends was charged with murder, like literally charged criminally with murder, for shooting a hostage taker at a hostage taking with a working gun, who pointed the gun at him and got shot once in the body. There's no way, it's all on video. There's no way that should happen. But we had police accountability mechanisms that had a mental model of, we need to charge these cops. We need accountability for these shootings. These are homicides, without understanding they're a non-culpable homicide. Like, there's a very big difference between a murder, where you plan to kill someone, and you're responding as a SWAT cop to a hostage taking, and you have to use force to save someone's life. And so, to me, the more we can get these messages out into the public in a respectful, educational way, the better the policing profession is going to interact with the public in the long term. And that's why I'm okay opening this up to more people, Joseph, and not restricting it to just law enforcement.
Excellent. So we want to help you get your messages out too. And I know you do workshops and public speaking engagements. How does someone go ahead and get a hold of you?
Yeah, sure. I have a website. It's just my name. So www.markbouchard.ca. And on there, I have a few things. I have like I have a sample chapter to my book. So it's the 2nd chapter. It's the first one after the introduction, which is all about stigma. I start every chapter with a quote just like that. That one comes from an Ontario coroner's inquest into police suicide, and it calls for how badly we need to reduce stigma in the first responder community, in the policing profession. And that's why the title of my book is Setting My Sights on Stigma. It's me trying to further that in my own way. And then I tried to put some other resources on my website as I get a chance. So I have a few blogs, and I have some links to books, like little book summaries, and even some journal articles and organizational reports. So things like that coroner's inquest into police suicide. Well, it's a 30-page report. And that's a lot for, especially when they're academic language, that's really hard for some people to read. So I try to just kind of give a short little summary to make it easy to read. And same thing for these book summaries. Like, you can see the books up on the screen, but books like On Combat and On Killing, like, they're 300 pages. They're awesome. Every cop needs to read it. But man, it's hard. We're all busy. So if you can read a summary of 5 or 10 minutes, it can at least give you a little understanding of what you're going to learn. And there's other books on there about emotion and about trauma and even about police suicide, because that's how we change the culture, is by talking about them in an educational way and helping to pass on those lessons to the younger generation.
I see you've got Bessel van der Kolk's the seminal work, The Body Keeps the Score. A difficult read too that was designed for clinicians. It's a weighty read, so a summary can be very helpful with that. And it's it can actually cause people to have to put it down because of the trauma that, in order to go ahead and treat, he has to go ahead and be explicit. So that.
But here's sorry to interrupt you, Joseph, but here's what I would say about that book. How helpful is that for first responders to understand their own experience? Because when I read that book, I actually did an audiobook to start with. I had like oh my God, he's talking about me. He's talking about my experience. And then to understand the finer detail of the science, when he talks about parts of the brain, right? So that like the parts of your brain for language shuts off. So you can't actually explain your experience of trauma. That's why it's so hard to put it into words. And that even a decade later, the part of your brain that lights up when you first experience that trauma keeps lighting up. So every time I had a nightmare, I wasn't just remembering something that was terrible. I was reliving the same feelings of the horrible event I had to live the first time over and over and over again, which is why I dreaded the night so badly. I knew that feeling would come over and over again, and I was so desperate to avoid it that I would drink to numb the pain. And by teaching people, we give them the tools to process their own world. And at the end of the day, this can't be something where, supervisors will notice. Well, then we'll get them help. No, let's empower people to help themselves by educating them. We hire amazing people to do all these first responder professions who care so much. And let's just put the resources out there to help them help themselves more.
Yeah. Excellent. I appreciate everything you're saying. And one other question, or one of my final questions, I've got a few. One, when is your book being released? Is it out yet, or?
It's not yet, Joseph. We're recording this here at the start of September. It's super close. I know I sent you essentially a finished manuscript probably about May. And I've just been getting back some reviews and recommendations from a few people like yourself, like notable people in the first responder mental health space. And just putting a tiny bit of final touches on. I expect it out fairly soon. I don't want to give an exact date. It's once it's ready, it'll be out, but it's right at the finish line. So I would expect by the time this podcast comes out that you'll be able to find it on Amazon. I'm fairly confident of that. So, but no exact date. It's self-published. So once it's ready, you just hit send. As you know, I ordered my own author copy already. I got that here in August. So just kind of putting the final little tweaks on, and it's going to be out there soon, and I can't wait. If anyone who does check it out or check out my website or my sample chapter, I'd love to hear from you. There's a little contact me page where you can send me a message, and I've heard from many people over the last year or two, made some great connections, and I really appreciate when I hear from people.
Good. And having had the privilege to get an early look at the manuscript, straight up, I loved it. I felt that it was going to be a pivotal book. It was going to go ahead and impact first responder community in a very positive way and open up the discussion and go ahead and get us talking, which is what we need to do to create cultural change. As we start to wrap up today, my questions for you are simple. What messages do you have for the first responder community? What do you want them to know? And, what do you want to go ahead and let us wrap up on?
Yeah, you know what? I'm going to leave a message of hope, Joseph, that we can do this. At the end of the day, we hire, like I said, amazing people. We solve murders, we save lives, we do the impossible regularly. But what it takes is a vision of a better future. And like what I say is like, let's not make this 20 years. Let's make it 2. Let's make it 2 months. Where let's have us as those doing the job change the culture within our sphere of influence. And the first place it starts is in your own mind. It took me years of saying I haven't done anything wrong and I don't have anything to be ashamed about. It took me years to build the confidence to be vulnerable, to talk about it, to normalize it. But I know that it helps those around me. And I just really believe that we can't control some of the trauma, but we can control the organizations. We can control the support. We can make the training match what we're going to face. Instead of just teaching a cop to take notes, let's teach them how to actually process trauma. Let's teach them to understand suicide, not just because of police suicides, but because of dealing with suicidal people. So I just really believe that, we can create the better future. We have the power, and let's take action. And it starts with your own mind, and it starts with taking action to be healthy yourself. And once we do that, when we're healthy, then we have the power to create healthier organizations and healthy communities, and to really create positive change in our world. And I just want to leave with a thank you to you, Joseph, for helping me to do that. I appreciate the opportunity to come on this show to chat with you. I've got to know you over the last year, and it's been awesome. And thank you for helping to create the course that we've worked on. Like I said to you, I would teach it for free because I just want to help people, and you are helping me to do that. So a big thank you for what you are doing, and have the courage and the vision to create the Institute and to really help a lot of people. So thank you for your work.
Mark, it's much appreciated. Thank you for taking the time today to be on this episode of Enroute. We can't thank you enough. Mark Bouchard, Royal Canadian Mounted Police, author of Setting Your Sights on Stigma, Thoughts from an Injured Mind. Thank you. I'm Joseph Burgundy. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Enroute. Enroute is a production of the First Responder Behavioral Health Institute. To learn more about us, head on over to FRBHI.